Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sixto Wagen. He, him, his pronouns, and I'm the director for the Center for Art and Social Engagement at the University of Houston in the Catherine G. McGovern College of the Arts. Sydney?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. I am Sydney Mori Garrett, pronouns she, her, and I am curatorial assistant and arts coordinator at Project Row Houses. Before we get the ball rolling, it's important to do our land acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge the original inhabitants of the land on which we gather virtually. The city of Houston and the Gulf Coast region is within the traditional territories and unceded land of Sana, Atakapau Ishak, Akakisa, and Karankawa peoples. We also recognize the Native peoples that share the Southeast Texas region, including the Tonkawa and Ko-Awit Ikan, and that what we build here today is connected to their histories. One last thing before I pass it on to Sixto. In addition to everything that Sixto said in terms of us recording and changing your pronouns, also make sure to keep your mics on mute throughout the presentation. At the very end of the presentation, we will have a Q&A session in which you can turn your mics on if you have specific questions. If you do have a question during the presentation, please go ahead and drop it in the chat. Sixto and I will be watching that throughout, and we will get back to that at the end. If for any reason you have a personal question that you'd rather ask one-on-one, or if you're just not able to stay for the whole presentation, we will go ahead and drop our emails in the chat as well so that you have direct contact to us beyond what we're doing here on Zoom. And with that being said, I'll go ahead and pass it to Sixto.
Thanks, Sydney. So just to give you a heads up, outline of how we're going to work this today, I'm going to start and talk a little bit about the history of the fellowship and brought us today. Sydney's actually going to bring us up to kind of the learnings from 2020 and what are the changes for 2021. And then we're going to go through the application, the online application, as each question and kind of ideas and responses to those. Including the work samples, and then talk about logistics in terms of timelines. And then at the end of that, we are going to open up to Q&A. We are saving the majority of the time for Q&A in order for your to be able to answer your questions. So hopefully, again, if you have any questions beforehand, you can drop it in the chat and we'll try to get it to you in this before then. So the history of the fellowship. This is the Catherine G. McGovern College of the Arts Project Row Houses Fellowship that began in 2017 initially. All of that actually, the history of it actually started a couple of years before that when Ryan Dennis at Project Row, who was the curator at Project Row House at that time, brought a number of us together in order to talk about residencies and really think about what does it mean to host a residency and an artist residency, and what do people get out of it? Where, like, what does the organization need to provide for the most beneficial ones? What do we need to avoid? And thinking about that because of for Project Row Houses, how could they expand and extend upon their amplify their legacy in order to think about what's next? How do we actually help support other artists? And actually, you know, they've been asked in order to model it for other organizations, but what does it mean in order to help that specifically for artists? In 2017, when we created the College of the Arts at the University of Houston, and Rick Lowe also was hired onto staff as a faculty member, onto faculty member, I'm staff. And then we also created the Center for Art and Social Engagement from the Center for Arts Leadership. This was a major transition for the college and for the university, and an opportunity for us to reframe our relationships to the work and actually like forefront community and forefront our partnership. This partnership with Project Row Houses is bedrock for the Center for Art and Social Engagement. It is really what we actually hope to achieve by actually focusing on practice, focusing on communities and centering artists in order for us to understand how the impact actually happens and how do we expand and amplify that impact, utilizing engaging our communities, not only our communities of place, like Third Ward and Houston, but also our communities in terms of our students, our communities of the networks of universities, the networks of arts organizations, and so on. So what do we hope to achieve? We invested in artists in order to catalyze their careers and their work. We also wanted to promote social practice and community-engaged practice in work in Houston and beyond, thinking about the legacies of Project Row Houses and really what those philosophies are and how do we actually support, like do residencies in relationship to that. And then how do we actually develop next leadership among artists within our communities, including the students, the faculty, Third Ward, Houston, and also not only about like, it's not necessarily leadership as a title, but leadership as an action. So in terms of that, in 2017, we invited Carol Zoe and Kara Schneider in order to be our pilot fellows. They did an incredible job, and we had a lot of learning with them as to what the focus is. I'm sorry, one of the primary ideas and changes about the fellowship, this is a research fellowship. This is not a project-based fellowship. It is about your learning and your investigation. That is why we phrase everything or frame everything in terms of guiding questions and really make sure that in terms of community engaged practice, we're not forefronting a product. We are forefronting the relationships and forefronting the process in order to make that happen. So that is what we did. We engaged in the process with Carol and Carrie in order to test our ideas and make sure that what we had and like what Ryan and I had established as a framework actually made sense. And we worked together and developed the monthly check-ins, the brain trust, in which is artists and community members who are actually there to support and ask critical questions of the artists. But really understand that this is actually how do we learn and how do we learn as organizations and artists. 2018, Regina Agu and Yapam Gulalat were our fellows, and that was our first open call. And as you can see, that part of this is about how do we bring a local artist who's engaged in community practice together with somebody from who's non-local, somebody who would be coming in occasionally or coming in or spending a lot of time here in Houston. Carol actually had long-term relationships with Project Row Houses and long-term relationships with Houston. Yakum this was the first time he actually engaged in Houston and first time he worked with Project Row Houses from Oklahoma. He had learned about Project Row Houses via resources, but never actually stepped into Houston. And he actually spent a number of months in Third Ward on site at Project Row Houses and developed a number of relationships there. In 2019, Sara Rafael Garcia and Libby Bland were our fellows. Sara is based in California, and Libby is an architect and urban planner. And I think that later on in the info session, we're actually going to I'll be bringing up the guiding questions that Nicoletta actually framed in order to, as part of the questions and part of the answers here. Just in terms of the histories, this is an ongoing partnership between Project Row Houses and the Center for Art and Social Engagement and the university. We are acknowledging as the center, as a director for the Center for Art and Social Engagement and U of H, that the process and the philosophies are Project Row Houses. It is they have 30 years of work that we are helping to amplify and helping to support. I might have practice as well, but all of this is about their histories and they are the experts in this. And part of our exploration is trying to understand how can a university partner with an arts organization and a community in ways that are supportive of the community and in ways that are as equitable as we can in relationship to understanding the vast differences in terms of resources, land, power, and so on. I will also admit very clearly that this fellowship mandates that you actually are an English speaker, and as much as we would love it to be multilingual in the aspect. Unfortunately, I'm a monolinguist, and I'm actually a key person into this form, and I wish that I could speak in different forms, but that's basically where it goes. So there are ways in which that the fellowship also continues to adapt and change. And in terms of that, I think it's time to pass to Sydney.
Thank you, Sixto. So in 2020, around I think late October, beginning of November, we gathered with our past fellows, some of which Sixto has mentioned, and we had a group discussion with those past fellows about the current climate of our world and how do we move forward with this fellowship responsibly now. And one big thing that came up in that discussion were the application process. They expressed that, during this time, people are reaching out to artists more than ever to engage with artists and engage with community. And also artists are going for more opportunities in order to help with what the pandemic has done to the freelance landscape. And so applications were just coming left and right. And the artists really asked us to think about caring for the artist behind the application and making sure that the application is as easeful as possible. And so from that conversation, Sixto and I went back, looked at our previous applications, and really edited and modified the guiding questions to make sure that we cared for the artist on the other side. Of course, with that, there is some information that Sixto and I just need regardless in order to make sure that the applications get assessed properly. But we really did as much as we could make the application what I like to call softer so that it is less burdensome on the person on the other side. Another thing that's changing, Sixto just mentioned some of our prior fellows. We have always had 2 fellows, one local and one national. And that national fellow would come in and expand the engagement with our communities. With 2020 and the limitations on travel, that was honestly a huge challenge for us this year to keep the national fellow engaged in the ways that we wanted them to be engaged as previous years. And so we just came to the conclusion that in order to engage with our communities efficiently and responsibly for this next cohort, we just have to have one local fellow to make sure that we are following all guidelines in terms of the pandemic. Now I will get into what this fellow will receive.
I'm going to share screen, if you don't mind.
Yes, thank you.
Is everybody seeing the application page? I hope.
Okay, great. So this webpage is accessible through the USH website. This is also where you go to physically apply for the application. And there's various information about the application. I'm going to get down to 2021 Susan Field Booth Fellow will receive, ... a $15,000 annual stipend, a $5,000 project/research budget, community brain trust of local artists, community members, and faculty to advise and ground the project in a local discourse. That community brain trust happens by Sixto and I engaging with the fellow, looking at their project, and then we help them choose someone who is in the community, really rooted in the community and rooted in the work that the artist is interested in focusing on. That community brain trust also gets their own stipend. And then from there, they kind of have an engagement with someone in the community beyond just Sixto and I. And they kind of do that without us, so it's a little bit more intimate. And looking at the last bullet now, I think Sixto and I could make an edit to that, but local housing at Project Row Houses. And in the past, the National Fellow did have a $3,500 stipend for travel, but the housing at Project Row Houses is still open for the local fellow that we will be having this year. And I guess to clarify, housing doesn't mean like you get an apartment on Project Row Houses property or anything like that. It means that, Houston is so vast that there could be someone who lives on the north side of Houston And in order to engage with Third Ward and with our communities, you have to be in the community. You have to be a part of the community. And so if they're like, hey, I live on the north side, but I need to stay in Third Ward for 3 weeks. I have this and this going on. Project Row Houses will be able to provide that space for you. So kind of think of it more of like an Airbnb and not an apartment. And yeah, I think that's the end of my segment, and I'll go ahead and pass it to Sixto.
Great, thanks. So we do clearly need to edit, we'll edit that on that aspect. We also are, as you can see, like lower on that page, we will be putting in FAQs or any other questions. So other ideas and questions that are pertinent to share to the larger community, we'll actually be adding onto this page later on. So I'm actually going to go ahead and we're going to go through the application at this point. So when you look at apply online, you will actually come up with, come to this page, the UH Catherine G. McGovern Project Row Houses Fellowship 2020 application and all of this. We are asking you in order to submit in terms of using a Gmail account. Part of that is because if you actually are using a Gmail account, you can get a copy of your responses. And so that is also, and right now we are utilizing Google Forms because we don't have to pay for it at this point. I'm sorry, we don't have to pay cash. We're paying it for in many other ways. So we actually ask for your email address. So I'm just going to go ahead and this is a required question. And then Sixto and the phone number is 713s. Okay, so like if you're actually doing it and if you need a different, so if you actually don't want to use your Gmail account, go ahead and put that in. And then we have, and then as I said before, it is requiring everybody in order to be a Houston resident. And yes, Aisha, it is, local artist is defined simply as someone who lives in the greater Houston region. Yes, and work history is in the region is not required, but I do think that work history in relationship to communities is important. So here we go in the next question. Hopefully, you as soon as you answer yes to this, it will get you to the second page. What are the guiding questions for your work in this fellowship, and how does that investigation build on the history of your community engagement? So this is actually where it is. The community engagement does not have to have been in Houston. But you do have to have a history of community engaged creative process. And again, I'm going to emphasize, this is about asking guiding questions. The reason why we frame it as guiding questions is because it is about process, and that you are, every one of our fellows who's gone through this, they've come with guiding questions, but realize that in the process, in the communication with the residents, with community members, with Project Row Houses, with me, that those questions became bigger, and they became more refined and different as learning happens. And I think that that's why we want to continue to ask you to lean into guiding questions. And one of the things that I want to just share with you is that here are some of Nicoletta's guiding questions from her application last year. Is that Nicoletta examines how modern society asks women and people of color to hold space and care for others, and questions, when do we care for ourselves? Her guiding questions were, who heals the healers? How do those who take care of others restore themselves? What if all public space is safe space? And what if art is used as a tool to build community and promote self-healing? And what if everyone practiced self-love out loud? These guiding questions were integral to her practice over the course of COVID, even though that she wasn't able to spend as much time here in Houston as we had all hoped. All of these questions gave her a very clear guideline in during COVID and during the pandemic in order to think through this. And then she created a number of videos and a number of responses that explored all of these questions, and actually all of this became really relevant at the time when all of us are facing a global pandemic. So I guess it is really, what are you interested in investigating? why, like, and why are you the best person in order to be investigating it, and who do you investigate that with? Sydney, do you want to get the next question?
Yes. So the next question, what would this fellowship with UH Catherine G. McGovern College of the Arts and Project Row Houses allow that you have not yet investigated / achieved? This question is pretty straightforward. You know, any job interview or anything, they always ask you why us. And that's basically what we're asking here. We want to know what is the exchange in between not only you and the community, but also you and Project Row Houses and you and UH Catherine G. McGovern College of the Arts. And then the question after that, tell us of an example of community recovery you're inspired by. Again, another very straightforward question. It's important for us to know that you're aware of the community engagement landscape around you. And we're also just interested in knowing what has caught your eye. There have been many community recovery efforts happening within the past year because of the pandemic, and especially with our recent winter storm that Texas has gone through. But also know that community recovery has been in a part of art practice for much longer than the previous year. So there are many examples that you can pull from. And again, we just want to know that you're aware, you're paying attention to what's happening around you, and we want to know what you're interested in.
So this last question is, like, to whom do you see yourself connected? It actually expands on the ideas about community recovery. Basically, this is about community. This is about connections, and this is about the relationships and networks. And this question is basically making sure that you have a network, that you understand who your network is, who are your resources, and how you are an active part of that. And this is not just about an immediate physical network. It's also about a virtual network. It's also about a historical network and who you're connected to. So there's also opportunities in order to talk about who are the other artists that you've worked with, or who are the other artists or community members or leaders that you've learned from, in terms of that type of connection. It could also be in terms of connection of who you are working with, and why that is important in relationship to the guiding questions that you're bringing forward. So hopefully it is for us and the adjudicators, in order to just understand that you see yourself as part of a community, and how that this work will continue to be something that has impact beyond just you, and who else it will be actually understand, and how it'll be able to impact. So hopefully that's clear and gives some sort of ideas. And yes, so Seema, your can talk about connected to now, and yeah, who would also be relevant. This is this is another option, is to not option. It is an opportunity in order to say how the work and the guiding questions are informed by other people, other communities, other thoughts, so that it's not just about you as an individual, but you as an active member of communities and an active member of networks. So I think that answers, at least that's what I'm going to answer for now, and then we'll be able to open up some more questions in a second. I'm going to stop the share and just kind of come back to all of us for logistics and then Q&A.
I am going to go over the work samples portion of the application as well.
Sorry. Before I do that, let me just go back and share my screen, because that's important.
Yes.
Here we go. No, I need to put some text here first. Hold on a second. Helium. Okay, there we go. Here's the work samples.
Great. So for the work samples this year, we are only asking for up to 3 of either images, writing, videos, or any examples of prior work that relate to your fellowship questions and prior community engaged work. Doesn't have to be 3 of each. if you do images, it doesn't have to be only 3 images. You can mix and mingle with those mediums as much as you need, but we do need at least 3. Please combine all of the images, links to video or websites, or other materials in one PDF or document. The maximum accepted size for the document is 10 millibytes. Is it millibytes or megabytes? Megabytes. Thank you.
Also, just in terms of the video, it is going to be less than 5 minutes per video.
Thank you. Less than 5 minutes per video. And one important thing about video that I always mention, if you're sending video links, please make sure that your video links are not password protected. It is highly unlikely that if we cannot access your video, either Sixto, myself, or the jurors will reach out to you to ask for a password. And so that's kind of kicking yourself. Make sure your videos are not password protected. And if if you're proposing something that maybe you do not have direct work examples for, make sure that your work examples are able to give Sixto, myself, and the jurors an idea of what you are going for, so they should be still related in some way. And with that being said, I'll get into some logistics.
I'm sorry, Sydney,
yes.
I skipped an entire page. So let me just, if you don't mind, before we go to the logistics, we forgot about the whole idea about the bios and the CV.
Oh, okay.
Because it's relatively straightforward. If you have a CV or a resume, you can upload up to 3 pages. If you don't have a CV, you have up to 500 words in order to put in a bio. So basically, you don't have to describe yourself in the other questions. Save that information for this page. And we try to make it relatively simple. And then in terms of, it is 3 work samples maximum, and it can be 3 images or 3 total work samples. So it will be either 3 images or a compilation of 3 images, videos, writing samples, or so on and so forth. So I think that we can get back into some more details in that. And now, Sydney, sorry for the interruption. It's now back to you in terms of the logistics and next steps.
Right, thank you. So one important thing to note about the application does not save your work in progress. And so we do advise that when you sit down and do the application, make sure that you have enough time to complete it. If anything happens, or if you don't have enough time for whatever reason, you can copy and paste the blank, save it in a Word document, and when you come back, paste them back in. But it is important to know that if you leave the application in the middle before submitting, it will not save your progress. Your application is due on March 29th at noon. I always want to say at noon, it is not at midnight. So please make sure that you submit it by noon on March 29th. From there, Sixto and I will organize the applications for our jurors. Our jurors will then review the applications. Our jury is comprised of 1 University of Houston community member, 1 Project Row Houses community member, and a local artist. So the juries will then go over the applications, select who the new fellow is, and then that announcement will be made at the end of April. You all will also be receiving emails of your acceptance, or if we have decided to go another way. And then we will publicly announce at the end of April. And the new fellows term time will then begin in August of 2021, and it will go through September of 2022. And now I guess we can open up to Q&A unless Sixto has anything else to add. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or you can turn on your mics and ask us directly.
Yes, and we are excited about other questions because we have been doing this for a while, and sometimes it's important for us to understand where and what we haven't stated. So I'm just going to go through some of the questions that are in the chat in terms of, so Aisha, you actually, um, is it 3 images total or 3 works total? I would say that it can be, all of these are going to go into one PDF. So like, basically you are submitting one PDF or one document that will have links, a video and or other, or you could have the images or a link to another PDF that actually has multiple pages or images. We are saying that it is about 3 works. If you have like other PDFs, like it is up to our jurors in order to watch as much as they feel is important in order to get the ideas. We don't want to necessarily like be reductive and say that everything has to be in 3 images, but I am going to say that we also are not going to be watching 20 minutes of work for each project that you're submitting, just because we are, as we are trying to be careful and mindful of you, we are also trying to be careful and mindful of them and the time that they are presiding to this. You can provide the information as you think that is beneficial for us to get a sense of the work. It will be up to us in order to, but also understand that it will be up to us in order to kind of take in as much as we think is necessary within, like, from that sample that you've provided. I hope, Aisha, that provides enough detail. Great. In terms of Siobhan, you actually asked a question, is it appropriate to actually put physical tangible names there or artists and friends? It is up to you at that point. I would say that you can go ahead and put, if you want to name names, great. If you want to name types, like, like communities or types of people, also fine. I don't think that we are going to preference one or the other, but I think that as long as it actually gives you a sense, it gives us as readers a sense of the communities that you're talking about, I think that would be sufficient. I will also just
I do
like,
have a,
yeah, go ahead,
oh,
Siobhan.
I'm so sorry. I did have another question too, along the same lines of Aisha's. Um, in terms of submitting the work samples, I noticed that on just the description of the application itself, it said that you could submit links to like websites.
Mhm.
But then on the application, it doesn't seem to be a field to put in a link, but rather just the PDF. Um, so is there
Right.
an option?
So I would just go ahead and in the one document or the PDF, give us a link there and just
Oh,
put it.
okay.
Yeah. So
Okay.
just because of the way that we are, because of the way that this format actually happens, it's just easier for us to have the one document with all the links and the information, and then we can actually
Okay.
share that out separately. So it's,
Gotcha.
it's basically I need the table of contents.
Yeah.
Um, that you're submitting, and then I can have on those other pages so that it's easier for our jurors to and it's easier for us to just share the information.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Like, I'll actually like list that. It's like maybe a table of contents that might not be a bad thing. And I guess in terms of Siobhan, just in terms of the networks of people, if you name names, understand that some of the jurors might not know all of might not know those names, like individual, might not know them personally or might not know who they
Right.
are. So
Right.
that's
Okay.
my only caution with that aspect is um, some of us do, some of us won't, and
Right.
hopefully, if but then realistically, we don't. We might know, we might not.
Gotcha. Okay. Sounds good. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, Seema.
Yes. I was wondering, people's art practices are, pretty broad, right? So like it could involve, I used to work at PRH as a docent 5 or 6 years ago. So I saw a broad range. But anyway, my question is, um, so when it comes to, okay, what is considered art? I mean, that's also pretty broad, right? So is it, what I'm trying to say is, okay, it's community based, but is it art as in, okay, fine art and that's it? Or is it art as in, okay, it could be education, it could be X, it could be, some other kind of community engagement that's not just fine art?
I will say that fine art is not a term we ever use. It is about art and community engaged practice. So it is about creative practice that is and responsive to community, and it can show up in many different ways. And if you look at the examples of our past fellows, that
Mhm.
shows up in multiple different formats. Like, you know, from uh, from practice-based work, from performances to objects, and as well as concepts and actions. So it is up to you to define for us what the art is and how that is community engaged practice and how it is responsible and responsive. And I think that in terms of it is both broad in terms of definition, but it is also going to be one of those where when the jurors actually are going through the programs is we have one fellowship in order to award. And so it's going to be a question about impact, about timing, and about kind of what are the needs of our communities right now, and how does the fellows propose guidelines or questions actually support and expand on those?
And I have one more question.
Sure.
My husband he works for U of H. He teaches in the honors college and he's an academic advisor. So is that a conflict of any sort? I just saw that someone else is asking something just like this.
No.
Okay, thank you.
No, I'm like, I'm sorry. The only conflict is that you cannot be a current student at U of H at this, like we expect everybody to have been out. And then in terms of any of those other conflicts, we will, I'm glad that you named that, and it would be great if you actually just name that this is a question, or you can email us if it's a question. But in general,
okay.
We don't really have. Sydney, do we? I think that unless you are actively already receiving monies through the fellowship or or our work, I don't think that it's going to be considered a conflict. Sydney?
No, I completely agree. I did just want to add one thing for you, Seema, and for everyone, because it was a good question on like what we do consider as art. As you know, previously working at Project Row Houses, we believe that any and everything is art in its own way. I know Six Toe went through some of our past fellows in the beginning of the presentation. I'm also going to drop a link in the chat. When you go to this link on the right-hand side, you will see links for our 2020 fellows, 2019, 2018, and 2017 fellows. So on your own time, if you ever want to go back and see some examples of what we have accepted into the fellowship program, you can look at those projects on your own as well.
Thanks. Seema, does that answer? I think that, let me also just say, I think Sean, is the question that you asked in the chat about names affiliated with PRH or UH conflict, is that in relationship to the network question? And I think that in general, as far as we're concerned, as long as you're not immediately related to Sydney or myself, then I think that conflicts are relatively we don't have. I mean, we do recognize this is community engaged practice. We are a community. We are active in all of this aspect. So there are many ways that we can define conflict. I think that the only questions are about fiscal. There might be some fiscal or legal aspects that we just will raise, and if there's any of those questions, we'll actually bring that up to you. So, great. And so, Sean, yes, if in terms of networks, that's not really an issue. Like in terms, like you are connected to them, and we allow you to. You should claim all of the networks that you think are relevant into this aspect. And Siobhan, in terms of the applications, this is a whole new year in terms of I don't know, like, and it's only limited to Houston. So we've had up to 120 applications in a year, but that was like international as well as local. And so we've also had, like within that, there's about 30 to 40 local, like, average every, like, up to 30 to 40 local applicants every year. This year, I don't know if we're going to get more or less because of the situations here. Other questions? Yes, Seema.
I'm wondering if the space, the main office there, is that gonna, do we know if it's gonna be available to hold any kind of events, classes, or whatever it might be part of our proposal?
We have no idea what's happening with COVID. So we don't know in terms of relationships to gatherings or in that aspect. We and Sydney will speak for Project Warehouses.
Yeah, Project Warehouses, we are all still working from home. And as of right now, as things in the news change almost every day, it seems. We do not have a concrete reopening plan. But if you do have something that you want to do in like the community gallery is what I think you're referring to, or in our houses, I think it would just be a case by case conversation in terms of what is feasible. And so I don't have a broad umbrella answer for you right now. But if you have something that you want to propose, I'm open to having a conversation about it.
Okay, maybe I'll email you. And we can talk.
I think that at this point, you can assume that I'm sorry, we can project that there might be public gatherings, right, with the time, because we're starting in September. We will hope that there are public gatherings that can start in September through that year.
Okay.
Acknowledge the fact that if we are not in a situation because of COVID and other aspects of whatever other crises Houston is going to face between now and September, how can you be adaptive to whatever the regulation, like what it is, and are the questions that and the guiding questions that you're asking, are they broad enough, or are they, like, if they are restrictive to very specific things, then maybe you need to think, like, rethink of like, how do we broaden the questions, or what are the other ways in which that you are engaging in that. And I'm not trying to say that you shouldn't be specific about your guiding questions. I'm just saying that let's not automatically assume that we are going to be able to gather.
Build in some flexibility.
It is community engaged practice. If you do not build in flexibility, you will not be awarded a fellowship with us. And Siobhan, like there is competition, and I think that is one of the things where we recognize that there are a lot of things that are happening, and it's an opportunity for people to. But we hope that this is also a high touch opportunity. It's not only are you getting a decent amount of stipend and research money, it is a lot of engagement with Project Row House's staff, the University of Houston staff and faculty and students, that those resources are also, and then mentorship with, and engage, direct relationships with me and the Brain Trust that I think are really significant. So there is a decent amount of competition, but I also think that hopefully the guiding questions that you are presenting are guiding questions that you are already in pursuit of. That these are not things that you are that are not dependent upon a fellowship, but these are questions that are actually part of your practice and part of what you're bringing into the world at this point. Other questions, other concerns? So just as a reminder, like March 29th by noon, and we make it noon just so that it's very clear, and I can respond, and I'll actually be awake if there are any questions that are coming in, and at that aspect. And then we are doing this, like the timeline is really different, because now we are actually like doing this application now, and there's months actually between the naming and the identification of the fellow and the start of the fellowship. And I think part of that is to help the fellow be grounded within the practice and grounded within communities, and what ways can we actually support them before the official launch of the fellowship year. And it is also now more in alignment with a university academic calendar, which has benefits for us in relationship to students and engagement with our faculties. it has a lot of other, it has, but that's part of the calendar in questions. Other questions, other concerns? Sydney, anything?
No, thank you all for being here.
Okay. I'll just pick that up. I think that, thank you all for being here. I think Sydney froze, and it's good to see all of you, and it's good. We look forward to getting your applications and reading more about your work. And if you have any other specific questions, go ahead and email either Sydney or me, and we will get back to you as soon as we can. Sydney, are you? Maybe not. Okay. If there's anything else, and I will hang out for a little while for any additional questions if you have anything. But otherwise, thank you so much, and we will be seeing you on your application soon.
Thank you
Sid,
so much. Thank you. This was very informative. I really appreciate it.
thanks, Siobhan. Thanks, Seema. Sydney, anything else? Sorry, you froze. Didn't know.
Sorry, no, I don't know what's happening with my Wi-Fi today. This has never happened before. But you saw I put the emails in the chat again.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you,
no, we're good.
everybody.
Thank you.